Smile, everybody! It's Java time. I could never be a children's television host. Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 4. I thought what I'd do tonight, of course, open up for questions right at the beginning. Assignment, project due. Project 2 is due today. There was lots of good discussion on the community. But if there's any other questions or things that people have about project 2 or project 3, we'll start with that. Then I want to talk a little bit about the topic that was covered in the screencasts, specifically the web stuff. I want to go over project 4. We'll take a look at what the archetype gives you there. And then we'll spend the rest of our class time working in pair programming on an Arcata. So lots of good stuff tonight. Thank you all for coming. I don't know about you. I'm looking forward to the final exam where we get to see all the people that are registered for the course but aren't coming. Actually, I've had that happen where it's like people have come in and it's like, oh, you're in this course? Yeah. Anyway. So projects 2 and 3, how are things going? How did project 2 go? What people think of it? Yeah? Okay? Yeah. How's project 3 coming? Any questions that you want to talk about or anything that it's, yeah.
Any limitations on how we format pretty print?
Limitations? No. I think there's a balance. No. Well, I think really the intent here is that I'd like you to learn how to use some of Java's text formatting APIs. So some of the more verbose forms of date format or the stuff with strf and things like that. But yeah. So. I suppose you could go overboard, big ASCII art or something like that. But yeah, I think use your judgment.
You probably saw the frustration with the simple date format on the community.
Yeah.
If you could actually go over some date parsing.
Sure. Date parsing. Let's see here. Like what? You want to see some code for parsing the date,
I guess,
or like?
Because it seems like you can set it so that it's not lenient with you can't have 1,000 digits and then a slash and then because it seems to accept that unless you set it to lenient. And then even then it's there were a few test cases I didn't consider the 01/01/2 0/1.
Java-util.
The one thing that I did on top of this simple date stuff was also do a regex comparison of what was getting passed in to make sure that it further complied. Because I think too, even with the set lenient, you could pass in a 2-digit year and it would take that, whereas ours required that it be a 4-digit year.
Mm-hmm.
So applying that and then doing the date afterwards is what I ended up.
David, do you require I know it says in the second assignment that year 4 you did it, but if it actually accepts 2-digit, well, is that okay?
So I don't think. I guess I'll say this: when it comes to parsing the dates, the test cases don't really change from project 2 on out. So I don't think I'm almost certain that I don't test 2-digit years. Yeah, I don't think I do.
Which is the requirement on 2 though as well, right? Which we haven't seen the test case yet, so it's possible that it's...
No, I'm sorry. It's project 1 on out. I'm pretty sure. And if it does, remind me of that, and I'll work. I'm pretty sure I always use 4-digit dates there. We'll come back to that. Let me think about how best to talk about it. Yeah.
So for the options dash print, dash readme, dash pretty, and dash text file, if you do say dash text file and then you do dash print, should it take dash print as the file name or should it check to see that's an option?
You could. I think so if I were implementing it and the user put in dash text file dash print, I would probably just create a file called dash print. I'm pretty sure that's not a test case because it's tricky, right? So So maybe with the exception of I think the assignment is clear what the format should be. I think it was not clear date format. I think there the assignment is clear where it's the command line argument after dash a text file is the name of the text file and I'm trying not to make I don't want the test cases to be tricky, but so I tend not to do that. But then again, tricky is in the eye of the beholder, I guess, or in the eye of the grader. So yes, I mean, so it's if you were to have that scenario, yeah, I would expect that. Then the name of the file would be dash print, which might be kind of a dumb name for a file. But stupid user exception. Yeah. Any other questions about the project or the cones? Has everybody at least gotten the cones running? Yep. Okay. Good deal. Sorry about that thing about the new line and creating the string with all the zeros in it. That's super weird. Like I said, I encourage you guys to file a bug with the guy that writes the cones and ask him, to like add a trim or something like that, because I think that's dumb. Blake, did you have something? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested in figuring out or hearing your explanation on how you figured it out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. And I think it's I guess it was the guy in 2012 sort of did the same thing. Let me actually, yeah, I'll run through that. Okay, so here is the cone. Okay, okay, well, yeah, right. So right, people had posted about it, and I ignored it, and there's like, oh, lots of people are posting about it again. Okay, obviously there's something there, and I wanted to know, is something crazy going on here? So here's what I did. First of all, I'm in the right directory. Happy day, exec. Okay, so like I gotten this far. And I just happen to know that there is an XML configuration file that says here where all the cones are. So I hadn't filled all these out, right? I did all of these just I had only done a couple of them on that first day. And by the way, that was command / to comment out a bunch of stuff. And so I went down to about file IO and run it again. So here I am about file IO. Okay, better file reading, writing. So I got the first two to pass, so this does not pass. That is not there. Once it's created, it does exist, and then it doesn't exist after you delete it. Oops. It doesn't compile, which is a bug that I'm working on. Actually, has anybody else seen this, where it spits out a whole bunch of compilation errors? Because what? Yes? Okay.
Especially with valid stuff,
Really? Okay. Post about it to the community, and I'll tell you what you need to do to fix it. This is my bug. This isn't the Matty B's bug.
The first time you run it, you get no errors. But then you modify something and you save it, and it reloads it.
Yes, that's exactly the behavior. Yes, and it has to do with that change that I made in week 1. Or whatever that was when I realized I had checked in those jar files and I shouldn't have them checked in or something like that. Anyway, I think I've got a better solution for it, but I've also got a workaround where you basically copy the lib directory, the lib that contains all of the Cohen class and stuff like that into this apps lib. There were some subtleties about how after when it detects the file change and recompiles everything that I wasn't aware of. But anyway, so if you do that. It should be okay now. Yeah, now it's better. Okay, so expected first line. Oh, wait. What was replaced me? Is that right? Better file writing, reading. But what about basic? Oh, it's not running that one now. Why isn't it running that one? Sorry. Why does it think? Oh, bother. Well, this wasn't happening last night. Yeah, right.
It's randomly not working.
That's messed up. Making me look bad, Cones. Making me look bad, me. So what I did is I debugged it. So I think I've shown this in some screencasts. So in IntelliJ, you have all these run configurations, and one of them is you can debug a remote VM. And so when you create one of these guys and you give it a name like localhost, because I'm debugging the right, there are two, I'm debugging the Cohen's VM, the one that's running the Cohen's. And it gives you this nice command line here that you can copy to the clipboard. And if you set the Maven ops environment variable to that value, now when you run Maven, oops, it starts it up and said, okay, before, oh, no, that's not what I wanted, sorry. You want to say suspend yes. So basically it says start up the VM, but don't do anything until the debugger attaches. So that's that command line. And so now when you run Maven again, it's sitting there, it's like waiting for the debugger to attach. You can do that by clicking on the little bug. And now this IntelliJ, that's so messed up. So now this IntelliJ is, oops. Now this IntelliJ is debugging my Cohen. So here I set a breakpoint for this guy, and now I want to see why it doesn't fail. How messed up is that? Huh. So I don't understand. And so then, okay, so I debugged it. Now this is a little of a weird debugging session because I don't have variable names. So I have things like slot 1, slot 2. And so like here is the, slot 3 happens to be the character array. And that's when I noticed that, oh my gosh, there are like all these zeros there. Isn't that kind of funny? And so then I was seeing it fail. And I thought that was unfortunate. So, oops. I'm not getting any output. Oh, there it is. Okay, so then what I did is, so like I was seeing what you were seeing. So first of all, I reproduced it, right? Where I saw, hey, I expected, first line, second line, and I got first line, second line. What's going on there? So I figured it might be something screwy about the string. So what I did is I extracted this into a variable called expected. Oops. Because by turning into a variable, then I would get one of those slots down there, and I could debug it. So we'll try this again. Oops. Oh, yeah, just like that. Did it actually work? Oh, now it's filing. Now it's failing. Okay, expected 22, but was replaced me. Okay, so now it's failing on me. Doesn't that make us all feel better? And then, yeah, the size is 22. It'll reload it again. Now I can debug it. Actually, I can just continue on, and then it'll stop here. Okay, so expected. Now I was looking for a string. Oh yeah, here it is. And sure enough, when I hovered over it, it's like, oh, first line, second line, and a whole bunch of zeros. It's like, oh yeah, right. Okay, that would do it. So, and it was funny because, maybe it's sort of like my background in C, but I'm thinking, okay, great, you have a character array, you get to the 0 character, and that's the end of the string, which is the way it works in C. Apparently it doesn't work that way in Java. And when I went back and found that the comment from the student in 2012 was like, oh, this isn't like a JDK 8 thing, or this has like been around for a while. So that's how I debugged. So that's what I did. I debugged it. So for me, I tend to go into the debugger pretty quickly. So between unit tests and debugging, that's how I solve the problems. So I could have also added a bunch of output or whatever. But what worked for me is just going into the debugger.
What is the debugger doing as I go through?
So what is the debugger doing? So there's a Java virtual machine, and there's a class file. And when you compile with, I don't remember the name of the option these days, -G, I guess. When you compile the source code into a class file, you can tell the compiler, hey, in addition to just the bytecode, just the instructions, add information that's useful to the debugger, like variable names, like line numbers, like things like that. So there's all this metadata about your code that's there in the class file when you compile with the debugger. It's sort of in the same spirit of C, which maybe you know about, maybe you don't. I don't. Anyway, so there is extra information in your class file that helps the debugger. The JVM, when you run it with those magical command line options, so I'll just stop this. Actually, I'll stop the debugger. When you run it with those magical command line options, so I'll just stop this. Actually, stop the debugger. So Maven ops are command line arguments that are added to the invocation of the Java VM that runs Maven. And actually, if you were to, let's say you wanted to debug your application when you're saying, java-jar, whatever your jar file is, if you add things like, the dash agent lib, all of this stuff, it will run the VM in a mode that allows a debugger to attach to it. So basically, the VM starts up, it opens some socket, and it's like, okay, debuggers, here I am. And so then, so that's what this does. And actually, so let me, let's not use cone. Let's do student. And I don't remember if I showed this or not. So, java-star target student.jar. Oops, nope, Java jar. Okay, not enough command line arguments. Blah 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 blah. Okay, yeah. Well, I think I implemented all of this. Dave mail 3.45 class Java. Oops. What did I do wrong? I know. Let's debug it because I planned it that way. Yeah, that's the ticket. So I'll open up. So I basically something I don't understand. I want to debug it. I'm going to open up my project in IntelliJ. Open a new window. And I want to then go to my main method of student, which, there we go. And now I want to debug it. Now, you can run the debugger from IntelliJ, right? Which maybe I think we've seen a couple times after debugging unit tests and things like that. But you can also, but I'm going to show debugging it from the command line. So I'm going to create myself a remote configuration. Looks like maybe I already did. I'll just delete this one and start over again. So add the plus sign, say remote, which means that IntelliJ is going to connect to a remote VM, a VM in a different process, if you will, right, over a socket and have a remote debugging session. And so, here it is, command line. So IntelliJ is nice. It tells you, oh yeah, here's like the magical invocation here's the magical command line argument that you need to add to the VM in order to debug it. So I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. That's what this little icon does right here. I guess there's no hover. And so then here, I'm going to copy all that, put it here. I want to say suspend yes, which means before you run any Java code, let me attach. It's telling me, hey, I'm listening for someone to. So this is the student program, hasn't started yet. The VM that's going to run the student program, saying, hey, I'm listening for someone to talk to me on port 5005. Oops, I didn't give it a name. I probably should have. So instead of just unnamed, I'm going to call it localhost. Now by clicking this, it says, okay, like run that configuration, which is start up the debugger and listen to that remote VM. Okay, here I am. Oh, that was not right. It connected and then disconnected. What's going on here? I'm not connecting. It's not seeing this. So Maven clean. No. Maven package. Maven package. The line numbers might have been off. Okay. I might explain that a little bit. Okay. One of the things that, so when I click the little red dot here, that says IntelliJ, oh, set a debug breakpoint there, meaning that when you get to that line of code, stop and let me inspect it. I think what had happened was that the class files that were on the command line, the line numbers didn't line up with the line numbers in IntelliJ, probably because the class files were out of date and needed to be recompiled. And that's why it wasn't hitting that breakpoint, because it's like, okay, I'm waiting, I'm going to break on line 110, and it might have been that in those class files there wasn't code on line 110 of that file. Anyway, so here I am. So now my IntelliJ is attached to that remote VM, right? I have two processes here. I have my IntelliJ process, and then I have my Java process running right here. And I've attached to that process, I've set my breakpoint, it's hit that breakpoint. And you can tell because it's highlighted in blue. And now I can use the debugger to find out more information about it. So, okay, here are my args and so this down here in variables, it uses that information in the class file to then figure out that, okay, inside the VM, there is like some representation, like that slot stuff that we were saying. There's some representation of the class and the method that's running. And by the way, here is the value inside the VM of something called args. And IntelliJ will inspect that, it will introspect all that, take it out, and then display it to you in a way that you can work with. So now you can look at your arguments. Keep going. Is this answering your question, Smith?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. So okay, I'll show a little bit more debugging, and then we'll circle back and make sure that you're getting your question answered. So I set my breakpoint, and I can then navigate through my code. I can inspect things. So I can say args.length, so I can see here that it's 4. I can also do things like run arbitrary expressions. So I can just say args.length here, hit return, and it tells me it's 4. Okay, that's good to know. Now I can navigate through the code. I have a couple options. Step over, which will just go to the next line. Step into, which will, if you're about to make a method call, it'll go into that method call. Force step into, I think will like go down to decompile bytecode if it doesn't have the source. And step out of says, okay, I'm in a method, like run the rest of the method and exit, but then break in the thing that called me. So I'm going to step here. And the most important thing to learn here is the keyboard shortcuts, because it's a lot of clicking otherwise. So I'm going to do F8. So I can step through, and as you can see, things like the variables are updated as new variables are introduced. So here I am about to call validate GPA. I can use the step into to then step into the call to validate GPA. Right here I am now. I'm in the validate GPA method. I can go through and inspect stuff in here, etc., etc. So, wild world of debugging, but does that answer your question?
Okay, so it's more like re-presenting the code to you in a way that my eye can see something different than the other. Like it's not actually like debugging anything.
Oh, does it? You mean like fix your code, fix your bugs for
It's
you?
not like identifying problems. It's just showing you the code in a different way, so you can.
Exactly right. It's letting you step through the code. So instead of just like seeing the output of your program, it's allowing you to like pretend that you are the computer executing each line, and it'll let you see everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Darn it.
What, you mean they haven't told you about the debugger in your other classes? Why? You should be using print lines. Anyway. So, user tools, right? Super powerful, will help you solve your problems more quickly. It's not cheating, really, it's not. Okay. Yeah?
Is there a version, so like GDB, where you debug from the command line instead of attaching from?
Yeah, is there GDB? There was JDB. Do they even have that anymore?
Yeah, they still have it.
Oh,
It's
it was
bad to use.
really bad to use. Yeah, I mean, it was like, oh, I remember trying to use it back like in the very early days. So what I found, okay, so like there was a command, so there's GDB, which is like a really nice and powerful like command line debugger, and like if you're a VI guy, you just want to deal with the command line, GDB is magnifique. You can do all sorts of cool things. But that's like for native code. That's for like C code and C++. And it's really nice. There's not, that I'm aware of, a good command line debugger for Java, which is unfortunate because sometimes what you want to do is, let's say you've got some remote server that's running your website and there's Java stuff, you want to like log on and do stuff remotely. What I've done in that case is I've run the program that I'm debugging, like my Tomcat server or whatever, is a web container, which we'll be talking about shortly. With the debug flags on and then attached remotely, which in some environments is okay, but if like you're behind a firewall, you gotta open a port, blah blah blah, it can be a real pain. Is that why you asked about command line?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked was last class compilers, we just, there wasn't a Maven anything, it was just, Java C startup, Java
Yeah, so actually, so the debugger doesn't have anything to do with Maven, first of all, right? Maven was just used to compile the classes, then running it, right? I just ran from the regular old command line. I did not use Maven to run it, right? I just typed Java. So yes, in your compiler's class, you could run the program, your compiler that you're writing in Java with the debugger flag on, but then you need something to attach it. And that's where you would need, an IDE, really, IntelliJ and Eclipse, something like that.
You still need to have the source code.
Yeah, you need this. Yes. Otherwise, you need to. It makes it a lot more useful. Otherwise, you're just sort of guessing. So yeah, you can decompile it, and I've done things like that, but it's no fun. So yeah, use your tools. Anyway, any other questions on debugging? I'm glad you asked. Hope this is something you guys take advantage of, and I'll be on the screencast so that you can go back and watch it slowly because I do a lot of clicking. Okay, good deal. Any other questions about the homework, the assignments, sort of how things are going? No? Okay. Well, let's talk about the next homework, because it never ends. Actually, it does end in a couple more weeks, but anyway. Okay, Project 4 client server. If you've watched the screencasts, or when you watch the screencasts, there are two topics that are covered this week. One is reflection, which is an advanced API that lets you do some sort of meta programming where you can write Java code that inspects other Java code. I'll let you watch the screencast, and please feel free to post any questions that you have on the community or comment on the screencast itself. I'll see that too. The other one, which is more directly related to your Project 4, is Foundations of the Web. And so this is where we talk about sort of the fundamental tools for running web applications or serving up web content in Java. And so we talk about a couple of things. Show of hands. I won't look at your faces, just your hands. Who has watched the videos? The screencasts. One. Okay. So then I will talk about some of the concepts. Maybe I should just look at the slides. That would be good. So no, I'll talk to it. So there is a big old Java program that's called a web container. So the whole idea is, you guys know how the web works, right? Your machine talks to some other machine over, if you're talking like HTML, you're talking over port 80 between two machines. Well, talking on port 80 to the server machine, and it's serving up web content. Now that web server is a program that receives a request, an HTTP request, and processes that request and sends something back in return. Right? That's basically how the web works. Back in the old days, like the original days of the web, you had a URL, and the URL specified some document. Right? I want to go learn what some physicist in Austria has done, and so then here's a link to their PostScript file, because there wasn't PDFs back then, and you put that into your web browser into NCSA Mosaic, and it went off across the internet and found that server and said to that server, hey, send me this PostScript file with this guy's PhD thesis, and then it sent it back. And so that was just sort of very simple. I'm looking for a big worldwide file system is really what it was. And so what the web server did was just sort of looked at this URL, said, okay, there's a file there, and return it. As the web servers got more and more complex, they could do more things, right? Then there was CGI, where it was like, okay, here I'm going to send you, a request for some information. You're going to do some query. You're going to figure out what the result is, and then send me that result. In the Java world, there is a standard API called the Servlets API, which basically is what you do is you have a special Java object that responds to web requests. And they have this Java API that models all sorts of things about the web request. Like, here's the URL that was requested, and here's the verb associated. Is it a put, is it a post, is it a delete, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a special Java object that you implement to provide the functionality of your web server. as you can imagine, so there's the Java object, but what like the client, what the browser sends down is the HTTP protocol. I don't know if you guys ever looked at the protocol, but it's text. It's like, hey, give me this resource, here are some parameters, and things like that. Well, in between your code, which programs to this nice API, and the raw web request, is something called a web container, whose role in life is to take the raw HTTP request, turn it into some nice Java objects, then get passed to your servlet, your Java object, to then handle it and do whatever, right? It's that whole abstraction thing, right? So the servlet, so all of the mechanism of HTTP is abstracted into this Java API that you interact with. So, okay, so those are sort of the pieces, parts. You have your code. So there's this thing called a web container, which is a program, is a Java program that runs, and it listens on port 80 for requests to come in. Actually, it can run on whatever port you want it to run on. But if it's HTTP, it's the standard one is port 80. It'll listen for requests. It'll handle those requests and then deliver to your code, which is deployed inside the container in something called a web application. So the web application it's called a WAR file. It's like a jar file in that it contains a bunch of classes. It contains, if your application has any images or any other files that get served up, it contains that. And there's also an XML file that configures the web application and answers questions like, hey, what URL prefix do I serve up? How do I map incoming requests to the Java code? Everything like that. That was the confusing 10-minute overview of what is probably a confusing 45-minute screencast that's up there. Anyway, those are the pieces, parts. Any questions on that? This is why I usually just read the slides when I lecture, because I'm not very good at the top on my feet. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to dive into the homework, and we're going to see some code, and I'll try to point some things out, and hopefully it'll make enough sense so that after you watch the screencast, you'll be able to go and watch the class again, and then make some progress on your homework. Okay, your project. So in the first three projects, the user interface to your program was a command line application, and your entire program was just in one application, right? All of the logic for parsing the command line, to getting the input from the user, for reading and writing the files, for printing, all that stuff, all one program, all one Java process. In project 4. You're now going to have two programs. You're going to have a server and you're going to have a client. And there's going to be some logic that's implemented in the client. There's going to be some logic that's implemented in the server. And the two are going to talk via HTTP, making web requests. So in your server, it's going to be a web server. And you could hit the same URLs that your command line client does using a browser, and you should get the same results. So your server doesn't really care what client accesses it. It just knows that it's talking HTTP. And that it's one of these, and then that the backend logic is implemented in a servlet. So what we do in project 4 is that we extend the airline application to have an airline server that provides a RESTful web services interface to an airline client, and there's also Java in there. So the goal is to first off write a Java web application, and then get a little bit more experience working with HTTP. And along the way, I've provided a goodly amount of helper code, which works on top of some of the, and I may actually say helper in air quotes, because I think it's helpful. But I've had some students say, wow, okay, it took me a little while to figure that out, so I'll pass that on to you. Anyway, helper code to provide nice APIs and abstractions over some of this communication. So in addition to the classes that you've implemented to date for your airline application, in project 4, you'll need to add an airline servlet. So the servlet is this Java code that resides on the server side and provides a REST interface to an airline. So it handles URLs. And so if you hit a URL, so HTTP, host is running on the port that it's running on, /airline/flights, !name equals airline. If you hit that URL with a GET, it should return all the flights in the airline and formatted using a pretty printer. So you're reusing your pretty printer and your airline classes and your flight and all that good stuff, but now it's running in this web container. If you post to that URL, that creates a new flight, and it has request parameters, the name of the airline, the flight number, the source, blah, 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 blah. So for this URL, it's all the same stuff that you used to put on the command line in projects 1, 2, and 3, but now it all goes in a URL. When you post that URL to the server then takes that information that's on the URL and creates a new flight in your airline. So it's a different interface for doing the same kind of thing that you did in projects 1, 2, and 3. There's another URL that your airline servlet should support. And here again is host port, airline flights, and if you have name, source, and destination, when you get that URL, that performs a query of your airline. So that returns all the flights that originate at the source airport, these are those 3-letter airport codes, and terminate at the destination airport. This is new functionality. I hope you can sort of think about how you would implement it in your airline class. And this is another thing that your airline servlet does. So this is what your web server does. It allows you to get all of the flights in the airline formatted pretty print. It allows you to add a new flight to an airline, and then allows you to query an airline to find all the flights between a source and an airport destination. So that's one part of the assignment. The second part of the assignment is a command line program that uses the Java APIs for performing HTTP requests. So this is doing the same kind of thing that a web browser would do. So you could enter these URLs into a web browser and get the results that way. But also, I want you to write a command line program that goes and creates the URL and then makes the request off to the server. The Project 4 command line looks a lot like the command line for your first 3 projects. So here again, you have the same arguments. You have name, flight number, source, part time, destination, and arrival time, but there's some different options. So here we don't have text file anymore. As a matter of fact, in this assignment, you don't write out to a text file. So that's not part of it. So unlike in projects 2 and 3, remember in project 1 where people asked, like, wait a second, I can only ever have an airline with 1 flight. This is stupid. I said, yes, that's stupid, right? And then in project 2, okay, the way you save state between invocations of your programs, you wrote out to a text file. In project 4, the way you save state is that you have this server that's running, that's maintaining all of the state for you. Yes, in the real world, you would write out to a database or a file. This is in the real world. Got to pay extra for that. Actually, we pay you in the real world. Instead, in Project 4, you have this web server that stays up that maintains all of the flights that you've added. So that's how the persistence is handled here. So on the client side, walking to my left, you have the same abilities that you had before as far as adding a flight to the airline, but now you have some new options. You can specify what host and what port it's running on, the server to connect to is running on. You can also have a dash search, in which case you only need to specify like the source and the destination. Dash print works the same way it always has, prints the flight that was newly added, and dash readme, our old friend. So here you have, so you have 2 programs running at the same time. And in my experience, both my personal experience and the experiences of my students, has been that this is like different, right? Actually, have you guys done any sort of concurrent programming like this? Ever done client-server programming? Yeah, a couple people, maybe, but yeah, but probably not. It's interesting because now you have 2 windows open, and debugging becomes more difficult. As a matter of fact, debugging with print lines will work well. IntelliJ can handle debugging 2 processes at the same time. It's actually kind of interesting. It's also kind of challenging. So I think what's interesting about this project is that now you're sort of working. You've got to keep 2 things in your head. So not only sort of the flow and all the objects, stuff like that, but you've got to keep that straight between 2 processes, and that's what makes it challenging and fun. Here are some command line examples. So you start your server, and I'll show how to do that in a little bit. So when you invoke the program with something like this, it should add a flight to the server. So this is adding a new flight to the command line. Here's what the syntax looks like for searching. So you need the name of the airline and then the source and the destination airport codes. New error conditions, of course, there's command line parsing, there's all that good stuff. But also, if I give you like a host and a port that doesn't exist or whatever, don't want to see a stack trace, want to see a nice error message, things like that. So I know I've skipped over a lot of details. I'll go into some more details right after I ask for any questions that you have. Yeah?
So there's dash search where then you would just specify 3 options, and then if you don't specify dash search, then you have to specify all of them and a new flight, right?
All of the required arguments. Yep.
Which one takes precedence? Because you can't. What if you did dash search dash print?
Dash search dash what?
If you did dash search and then dash print.
Oh. I guess that would be an error, right? Because you're not have a fully. Yes. That's yep. I guess that would be an error. Yes.
And up there you said if you just like did a get request to like the airline, it would output the pretty print.
Yes.
Doesn't look like there's any option in the command line to do.
You're absolutely right.
So is it not, are we not supposed to do that?
Nope. It's true, and it's actually probably an oversight on my part. But yes, your command line tool, the Project 4 main, does not hit this. It does not do a get of that URL. The grader will though. So yeah, yeah. Good questions. Anything else? Okay. Whew. Do you guys want to take a break? Yeah, say a quick break. We'll go over the Maven archetype, and then we'll do a little bit of pair programming. So let's take 7. Come back with the big hands on the 10.